Joining me now from Washington, Senator Judd Gregg. He will vote on Democratic fixes to the reform bill that will soon come before the Senate. I am pleased to have him back on this program. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie. It's great to be back.
Tell me what you think the historical moment we are at is. Define it and its implications.
I think it is at three different levels. First, I think we've fundamentally seen a change in the way that the constitutional process works. We're now seeing a Senate that is basically being operated like the House of Representatives, which is unfortunate in my opinion, where issues come to the floor and rather than having open and fairly lengthy debate with lots of amendments, it's structured in a very dogmatic way in the sense that basically amendments aren't allowed, or if they are allowed, they're very limited. Second, and that changes the purpose of the constitutional structure. The Senate was supposed to be the place, as Washington said, from which the hot coffee is poured from the cup into the saucer. And the saucer's now sort of been thrown out the window. The second big thing that I think is happening here is that the government is growing very dramatically. And the cost of the government is growing dramatically. We're going to go from a government that historically has been about 20% of GDP to a government that's now going to exceed probably 25, 27% of GDP. Those are big numbers. And it's going to be very hard to pay for that government. And I think in the end it's probably going to weaken our country to have a government that large, because we will either have to finance that government through massive increases in taxes, which produces productivity, or potentially even inflation, which obviously is the cruelest tax of all. Thirdly, obviously, the president has a big win. That's pretty historical. He sort of put his whole presidency on the line here, and he has a big win. I happen to think it's a win that pushes our government, regrettably, too far left and moves us down the road towards a European type of government. But it certainly can't be denied that this is a big win.
Do you think that's the government he prefers, that kind of government? A European-style social democracy?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, not only is the health care bill passed, but you know, they threw the baggage on this train of nationalizing the entire student loan industry. I mean, the entire student loan industry, more or less under the radar, has been nationalized, so that 19 million students who get their loans today from private banks are going to get them from the federal government as a result of that legislation being put on this bill. And then, of course, you have the movement in the area of financial reform. You have the movement in the area of the automobile. So there's no question this is as you said, a European approach, which basically believes in more of a social democracy type of approach, where the entrepreneurship that has been the core of the American value system, in my opinion, which has caused the creativity and the energy for our nation, is really dampened down by a government that's just awfully big and awfully intrusive.
So the defining battle that this president will face for the remainder of his first term and 4 years of a second term, if he gets it, will be what?
Well, I think it's just how far to the left do we go.
So therefore, you think what will happen in 2010 and 2012?
I suspect the American people will want a divided government again. I think they're going to want the checks and balances that come from having the White House in one hand and at least one house of the Congress in the other party's hands. I don't think they like to see this lurching that is occurring, in this case to the left, and this massive increase in government, because they intuitively understand. You know, American people have tremendous common sense. It's an intuitive common sense. They understand intuitively that if this government gets as large as it's going to get under this administration's proposals, their kids aren't going to be able to afford it. They're going to have a different quality of life. Standard of living will go down.
Let me just understand this, and maybe there's no distinction. This president wants a government that will stifle creativity. He wants a government that will not recognize entrepreneurial spirit. He wants a government that is not in the great tradition of respecting individuals in the great scheme of things.
Well, I guess I tend to feel they go hand in hand. If you explode the debt, and this bill, in my opinion, will inevitably end up exploding the debt, then you basically have to do a couple of things to address that, either raise taxes dramatically or devalue the currency through inflation, which inherently reduce the productivity of a nation and do significantly dampen down entrepreneurialism. The problem here, you know, at the core of this problem in this bill, if you want to look at my concerns, it is that they're reducing Medicare spending by $1 trillion when it's fully implemented over the first 10 years. Plus, they're throwing on top of it this 3.8% new tax on Medicare. insurance tax on passive income. All those dollars, which if you're going to take them, should have gone to make Medicare more solvent, because we know Medicare is our biggest problem. It's got a $38 trillion unfunded liability. All those dollars are being taken and moved across the ledger to fund a brand new major entitlement and to massively expand an already existing entitlement. And the practical effect of that is that you're basically doubling down on your fiscal problems. You're growing the government with new entitlements, which you know you'll never ever be able to fully afford. And you're taking the resources that you should use to make Medicare more solvent, and you're spending them.
Well, then the argument they make, obviously, is that they're making Medicare more efficient, and they're cutting a lot of abuse in that system, and that therefore it will provide better care at less cost.
Well, that's obviously not going to work. I mean, that's an argument I could make if you're willing to buy a bridge in Brooklyn.
No, why is it obviously not true?
Because we know in the Medicare system, they're tracking basically the Medicaid experience, where when they're pushing down so hard on the provider groups, the doctors in the hospitals, that inevitably providers stop seeing patients, and that gives Medicare beneficiaries less choice, and they are moving towards a system which will basically be very top-down controlled in the area of what type of care you can get by wiping out, for example, your ability to get Medicare Advantage insurance.
Is it possible, and what is the likely candidate, if you are making assumptions that are wrong and that people are not going to find that their own health care has changed, that people are not going to feel that this new system doesn't work, and that they're going to find out that they like it better when insurance companies, say, are treated differently?
Well, I don't think anybody has any debate with the insurance company treatment here. In fact, my bill, the bill from other members of on our side of the aisle, all had the same treatment, you know, the pre-existing condition exclusion. There's no argument over that. That's a given. That's what good health care reform should do. The debate is more over how health care is delivered and who pays for it, and how much it's going to cost, and how many new major entitlements you create. You know, I just can't accept the argument, and I think common sense tells you the argument doesn't work, that if you take $1 trillion out of Medicare to set up a new entitlement program for people who aren't on Medicare, Medicare beneficiaries are going to be affected pretty significantly in their type of health care. And there's a number of other things that like that. For example, if you say to small employers, you must buy health insurance for your employees, or you pay a penalty of, I think it's $650 or something per employee, or maybe it's $3,000, I've forgotten which the number is. Most people are going to say, hey, you know, the deal is to pay the penalty and let the government worry about the people I used to insure. So if people lose the insurance they have, they end up on this exchange, and who knows whether they can buy as good an insurance or get as good an insurance as they had with their employer. I think you're going to see a lot of small employers changing their insurance coverage as a result of this bill. And I happen to believe this bill is going to have a very negative impact on innovation. I mean, inherently, the way you create innovation is you get people to invest. Well, who's going to invest? Dollars. You know, dollars are fungible. Are you going to put your money into some sort of medical innovation investment where you've got long lead time and you don't know what's going to happen to the medical industry because of the really significant intrusion of the government? I think you're probably going to have second thoughts about that.
But you mean you're worried about the Pfizers of our time?
I am worried about capital being available for creative activity in the healthcare industry. Capital tends to go where it gets the best return. If you're investing capital, are you going to really invest in an industry that's headed towards some sort of very heavy controls from the federal government? I doubt it. Yeah. Or if you are, you're going to pay. It's going to be a very high premium to get that investment.
Unless you find more innovative ways to do it. Let me. Do you worry also, and this is the reason I'm interested in you and wanted you very much on this program today, are you worried about America becoming less of a competitive, that our whole structure and system is going to be less competitive in a world, stealing Tom Friedman's idea, that is more and more flat?
Well, I don't think there's any question about that. That worries me as much as anything. I mean, the simple fact is that as you expand, and I've said this a couple times in a couple different ways, maybe not as well as I should have, but as you expand the size of government, if you take government from 20% of your economy up to 28% of your economy, you inevitably reduce the productivity and competitiveness of your economy, because government does not create economic activity that produces wealth.
Okay, but I mean, people argue the following as well, as you know better than I do, that American competitiveness also has to do with its educational system, it has to do with its immigration policy, it has to do with a whole range of things, as well as how much government, the level of government penetration in a particular sector.
Well, there's no question about that. Absolutely no question. Our immigration policy is horrific in the area of competitiveness. We should be going around the world and saying to all the smart people in the world who want to come to the United States,
yes,
come, create
yes.
jobs here. You know, I mean, why are we leaving them in China and India where they're creating jobs? Bring them to the United States. No, absolutely. And in the area of education, we all know that our educational system needs significant more improvement. But is that what you were talking about here, I think, is the issue of the growth of the federal government, which is a function. You know, education at the federal level is really a minor part of our budgets, elementary and secondary education.
No, I was talking in a larger way about America's future.
Well, in America's future is at risk. It is definitely at risk because we are becoming less competitive in a very competitive world. And there are a lot of people out there who have the capacity to be innovative and who have the capacity to create the type of products that are going to be competing with us, and we've got to be able to be better than they are. And our strength, of course, has to always be entrepreneurship, risk-taking, and value-added ideas. In other words, being smarter than other people.
And all those things are at risk if coming out of what you just witnessed with this health care bill, in your judgment.
Well, in my judgment, we're moving down a path towards, as I said earlier, Europeanization of our nation and our great uniqueness. What surrounds American exceptionalism, what really drives it, is that entrepreneurial, individualistic spirit which goes out and takes a risk when nobody else is willing to do it, or comes up with an idea that nobody else comes up with, and that all gets dampened down the larger and more intrusive government becomes, especially if you follow a European model.
You think this is what's happened with the Tea Party, that they early on grabbed onto this idea that you're now expressing and said, stop?
I can't speak for the Tea Party, Charlie. I have to be very honest with you. I have not kept up with their thought process.
Oh, I thought you might take that chance to express an idea. Here's another quote from you. This was before you declined being Secretary of Commerce. You described what the president had done as an economic tour de force in his presentation of ideas for the economy.
Yes, and in fact, I was very supportive and remain quite supportive of what they have done in the area of financial reform in order to try to stabilize the financial industry of this country. You know, he got dealt some pretty tough cards on the issue of financial reform. And there was no question we were on the precipice of a catastrophic event in the financial industry, which would have affected everybody on Main Street. You know, people are a little less sensitive to it than they might have been, but believe me, if the banking system had imploded, which it would have, had Secretary Paulson, Chairman Bernanke, and Secretary Geithner, and the President, with the President's strong support, not stepped in and taken some very tough and very unpopular decisions, we would have been in deep trouble. And I've always given him accolades for that, and I continue.
That was government intervention you liked.
It was necessary. You know, it was totally against my strain as a conservative, but I was the guy who negotiated for the Republican senators, and we realized that we were in a totally unique situation. We had never seen anything like this before as a nation. Even during the Depression, I'm not sure that this type of an event could have been characterized, because the financial industry was so large that we were dealing with here. And we just had to think outside the box in order to save this country and save the fiscal situation of this country and really of the world.
Here's what the president said. Every once in a while, a moment comes where you have a chance to vindicate all those best hopes that you had about yourself, about this country, where you have a chance to make good on those promises that you made. And this is the time to make true on the promise. We are not bound to win, but we're bound to be true. We're not bound to succeed, but we're bound to let whatever light we have shine. In fact, that comes from Abraham Lincoln. But go ahead.
I thought it came from Ronald Reagan, but I liked it.
It may have come from Ronald Reagan, but maybe Reagan took it from Lincoln, and Lincoln took it from Jefferson. I don't know. But
probably.
You like that idea.
You know, I mean, no question. That's why you get in this business. That's why you run for public office, and that's why you want to be in government. Is you want to do something that you think is going to be extraordinarily good for your nation. I mean, everybody believes that, and the president certainly follows that path. He wants to do what he thinks is going to be very positive for the nation. There's just a deep philosophical difference as to whether we're veering off onto a path that may not be so good.
But what are you going to do?
When?
Well, I mean, how many...
For the next few months,
yes,
I'm going to work very hard to try to make sure that we pass good legislation on some issues that are still pending.
Okay, but I mean, health care is a done deal now. We'll see health care, and you think the country will live to regret it, is your bottom line?
Well, live to regret is a very strong term, but I do think it is going to fundamentally harm our capacity to see and pass on to our children a better nation and a stronger nation, because it's going to have such a distinct impact and negative impact on our fiscal strength as a country, because it's going to grow the government so much. And I genuinely believe, and this is open obviously for debate, that there is going to be a diminution of the quality of health care in this country as the government becomes much more dominant in those 170 million people who presently have private insurance lives.
It's always good to have you on this program. I thank you for coming.
Thank you, Charlie.
Judge Gregg, Republican Senator from New Hampshire. Back in a moment. Stay with us.